our next speaker today is coming right down to the nuts and bolts of it, to the practicalities of what we're here for. Georgie Somerset's a beef farmer and a rural leader. She's got experience across agribusiness, rural tourism and also regional development, which is a topic very close to my heart and I would imagine the hearts of most people living in regional Australia. Georgie believes in lifelong education and learning. She also believes in three very good things: good coffee, good champagne and good conversations. I think it's interesting. This is again a reflection of the diversity of speakers that we're going to be hearing today here and also across the other sites, in that everybody has something to bring to this conversation. And because somebody is working within a rural industry does not automatically mean you can assume to know what they think about biodiversity, about ecology, about energy, about the future. Because rural Australia is as diverse as urban Australia. There are people living in the bush with vastly different ideas on how we do things. And I suspect that from Georgie Somerset this morning, you'll be hearing some things that you will expect to hear, and you will probably also be getting some surprises about the sorts of things that she thinks. I come from the Western Division of New South Wales, and there are people out there who are conservationists as much as people who are conservationists in, on the eastern seaboard. They do things differently, but they are living in their country and they are very aware of the changes in their country. And I think that if you, as a rural journalist, I get to meet people on country, I get to see their reaction to what's going on in on their farms and on their grazing properties. And I think that hopefully what we will hear from Georgie today will bring home to you the sorts of things that I get to see every day. Because as a rural journalist, I'm very privileged. I get to tap into what's going on. Georgie, I'd ask you to come up to the stage and give us your presentation, and hopefully there'll be some champagne in there as well.
And I need that little pointer. I'm on. Thanks, Sally. I actually want you to think about a factory. And some of you might have travelled here in something that came from a factory. I know I travelled here in a small metal tube yesterday and had a really interesting flight across a mountain. But it just brings back the reality that we live with the environment all the time. So I just want you to think about how a factory might look and the things you might get from a factory. And I want to take you through a different sort of factory this morning. I want you to think about a factory where the ceiling is actually a vast blue sky, where the floor is actually a biodiversity of grasses, native and improved, that stretch on forever in places, where the walls are actually created by trees and fences and are naturally made. It's an amazing factory. And I want you to think about the production line in that factory, and I'm going to introduce you to it, the amazing, organic, living, breathing machine that is the absolute pivotal point of my factory. It's my cattle. And here are some of my beautiful cows, wondering what I'm doing, stopping and looking at them. So the whole reason that I have a factory is so that you can have fantastic tasting beef. When you sit down to a fabulous sizzling steak, when you gather your family around that roast beef, or when you're grabbing a pie on the way to the footy, or being given one on a flight, as I was yesterday, I want you to think about the fact that it comes from a long process and it comes from an amazing organic background. It's full of biodynamics and nature, and it's part of what we're talking about today. And I'm going to take you through that. And as Sally said, I'm going to introduce you to a bit of what I do, some of which you might know about, and some of which you may never have thought about before. So looking at facets, we're talking about food and agriculture, which I've just touched on, but then climate, energy, topsoil and sustainability. And the thing for me is that I just deal with them every day. So while some people might be interested in them for a job, they might think about them, or for some of you, you've studied them, we actually just live them. As farmers, we live with the climate. We're constantly looking at our sustainability because we want to be around for the long term. And we're trying to harness that climate to create energy, get energy into the soil, into the grasses. And the thing that dictates what we can do is actually the topsoil. So I'm going to touch on those elements of FACETS today while we're talking about it. And in terms of food and agriculture, the red meat industry is part of the food solution for Australian agriculture and actually for the world. And what we do is we actually convert native grasses and improved pastures to protein, which is an absolutely critical thing. And there are thousands of acres in Australia that, Sally touched on the Western Districts, they wouldn't support any other industry. But when they're well managed, when there's conservation and sustainability and the topsoil and the energy are all in sync and beautifully managed, you get an amazing food product. I'm going to share with you what I do each day, a bit of a life in what I do, and some of my factory offices. So this is actually, I love walk to work day. I don't know if anyone here from the city participates in walk to work. This is my walk to work. I walk to the kitchen. And this is often what I get to see. This is dawn out my kitchen window, and it's just fantastic. I think, that time of day is the most beautiful. And it reminds me that, there's always a new day. There's always new things that you can achieve and new things that you can do. But the other thing is that the kitchen is actually where we do a whole lot of our business planning. It's often the boardroom. It's strategic planning, operational planning. We look at the variables coming in. With iPads, we can both be looking at some of the climate predictions. We can be reading research papers. We can be discussing it. But it's really the hub of our business because we do an awful lot of planning right there in the kitchen. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time in another place, which I'm not going to show you a photo of, which is my office. This is the view out of my office. I have real difficulty turning away from this and focusing on the computer. But the computer, again, is really pivotal. There's over 20 years of financial data, paddock records, all our QA, so that you can sit down to a really safe food meal and a great steak. We've looked after all the back end. We've made sure that all the systems are in place. We've made sure our business is sustainable financially. All the planning is there. I'd show you a photo of the office, but they talk about paperless offices, and some of you might have one. I don't. It's piles of paper. And it's a constant paper trail in the livestock industry because we want to make sure that we are meeting all the requirements so that you can enjoy that fantastic steak. So that's the view out of that office. But I'm going to take you down the road. This is actually a road that is, on one side is the Murray-Darling watershed, on the other side is the Burnett Mary. So it's a really special road as well, that when it's flooding, you can see the water flowing in different directions. And there are places in my factory that I've never walked to, so I can walk to work and do all that planning in the kitchen, which is fantastic. But our operation is spread over 5 properties. And so we have very different, distinct offices where we work in terms of the paddocks. The first one I want to talk about is our forest country. And this is looking at the topsoil is absolutely critical. It actually dictates what we can do. So the T in FACETS is topsoil. Topsoil dictates what we do as farmers. It determines what we can grow and what we can harvest and what we can manage. So my topsoil in this country is a very sandy, fragile topsoil. These are some beautiful xanthorrhoea trees, and this is ironbark, box gum, apple tree, that sort of country, and it's where we have our breeder cows, so it's actually the hub of our business. This is where these girls every year produce a calf. And what we have to do is look after that topsoil and those grasses. It's all native pasture. You can't actually work this country. It's very difficult to improve it. It actually does get heavy frosts and we have protein droughts. So we just need to look after the native pastures. We need to look after the waterways, which again are really fragile. Make sure that these girls, or these are actually weaners that came from them, but that these girls are in good condition to have that calf every year. But to get a calf every year at the right time, so thinking about the production line, we need to know roughly when those calves are going to be had in spring. We need to make sure that our girls are in good enough condition over winter to have that calf and get back in calf. So to do that, we take the weaners away from them in early May and late April, and they're actually really relieved to see the back of them. You know how sometimes you're almost pleased to see your kids dropped off somewhere? You drive away and you're feeling a bit guilty. I don't think our girls feel guilty at all, because they get to go back in the paddock and eat grass for winter without worrying about their babies. So that's what we do when we take them away. So tracing back, they've spent summer on these beautiful native pastures, producing milk, growing the calf inside them, and feeding the calf on the ground so that we can actually take the weaner away. But this is the country they live in, and we have to look after that and make sure their energy requirements are good enough so that they're in the right condition, and it's actually a really finely tuned machine. Although they might be out there doing it on their own all the time, we're making sure they've got the right natural inputs, and the country's looked after and the topsoil's sustainable so that we can get a calf again next year. What we do when we take those calves away from their mums, we bring them home and we get to know them for a couple of weeks. We have them in the yard, we feed them some hay, we let them out in the house paddock. Primary school kids are fabulous for working cattle. They're happy to work them in the yards again and again, and the calves get really used to them. We don't do that for fun. We actually do it so the cattle get really quiet, and when we go to handle them over the years ahead, they won't get stressed. And because they don't get stressed, they then won't use their flight or fight response. If cattle use their flight or fight response, it can impact on how good the steak you eat tastes. And all this is part of making sure that you have a fantastic eating experience, that you get a fantastic steak on your plate, and it just doesn't happen by chance. So we spend time with those weaners, and we get to know them, and we just calm them down, and they're incredibly inquisitive animals. They get used to being around buildings and vehicles and people. And then we can actually put them out into our scrub country. So coming back to our topsoil, these properties are brigalow scrub, which some of you have probably seen photos of. Again, it's fragile, but we can improve it. It's much richer soil. It has melon holes with beautiful depressions that hold the water when we have rain. But in drier times, again, it's the last place where you'll find some pastures. And you can see the actual soil there. What we can do with that soil is actually improve the production from it, so we can improve the energy source for the cattle. So here we've got baby leucaena trees. So these are leucaena trees that are about half grown. And what we're doing there is that this country's been farmed since about the 1920s. So we're actually improving the energy cycle by planting a fodder crop that has a 40-year lifespan. It produces protein in its leaves for the cattle. It's deep-rooted. There's as deep a taproot below the ground as there is tree above the ground. And then you get the beautiful blend of grasses in there as well, native and improved. And all of a sudden you have a fantastic option of energy for your cattle to keep putting on weight. What that means is that you get great tasting beef because the cattle have continued to grow and been on a great pasture. These are more improved pastures, and the brigalow scrub gives us that option. So we work with the topsoil to make sure it's sustainable and it's cared for and that we've got a future. We know that in the past there have been some things that haven't been ideal, so we're learning from that and we're changing the way we manage the land. We rest it, we move cattle to new paddocks, we might supplement them in dry times, we might assist them, we turn them off, we sell them if we haven't got enough feed to going ahead. So we're constantly monitoring and managing, and that's what it's all about, is making sure that we look after the production line. In a factory, people know exactly what the inputs are. So when you're putting together a car or an aeroplane, you know that exactly the same components are going to be there to put on each time. In agriculture, we don't have that. We have rain, we have sunshine, we have frosts, we have wind. They're all things that you might deal with in your day-to-day life, but for us, we actually have to harness those variables and produce a consistent product out the other end. And that's where the monitoring and the evaluation and the learning goes on in between. These are some of the tools we use. And as I was saying, we keep learning, and I'm hoping that future generations will use amazing new technologies that we don't currently have. So we weigh and monitor. We meet really close specifications. You want to walk in and buy a 250-gram fabulous tasting steak at the restaurant. We need to have the cattle at a certain weight at a certain time so that you can sit down and eat that great steak. So we're monitoring, learning, constantly keeping an eye. You know how kids have a growth spurt and you just can't seem to fill them up, they have hollow legs? Same things happen with cattle. I sometimes find that my other half comes home and it's just something niggling him, and it might be that the cattle have got lice. and always reminds me that the kids come home with that note. There's been head lice at school. You don't wait till next week to treat them for head lice. You actually stop and you treat them right there and then. And it's a bit the same with our cattle. We want to make sure they're in the right shape to leave us, so we're constantly monitoring, constantly evaluating. In terms of sustainability, we talk about the climate and the environment, but one of the really critical things for us is also looking about the human resource. So this is my factory team, this is my factory workers. Yep, they're all family. We're big on multi-generational. Our age range at the moment is 11 to 85. We're pretty proud of that. And the generational influence that we have and the wisdom being passed up and down, it's mentoring at its best. So this is them at work, and these are some of the rest of the work team. And the passing on of wisdom is part of the sustainability. We need to learn from what we've had in the past, and we need to go forward. I always think of the babushka doll. If future generations can be greater than the previous generation, we'll end up with amazing agriculture and food businesses because they've learnt from what's gone before and they've become the bigger babushka doll, and we just grow bigger and better and we learn and we're smarter. But we have to pass on the wisdom and we have to be willing to learn from what's gone before. This is also where we play. It's a fantastic place to live, it's a fantastic place to work. We had floods recently, the last couple of years. It's been great. We've actually got a river to swim in again. There's nothing better than going down the river for a barbecue, being able to go down there and actually swim. There's been a few years when that was a rarity, so we make the most of it. This is actually this week. I was out doing a run, giving the girls some cottonseed, the cows some cottonseed, which has got a really high protein and energy source for them. And these swans are on about their third or fourth hatching since the big floods. One morning we had 35 swans on the dam next to the cattle yards, and they're so noisy. I had no idea swans were so noisy. But these cygnets have been hatched on the dam, and this is the sort of thing we get every day. We have the wildlife, and it's part of the biodiversity of our factory. It's not just about animals and creating beef, it's also about maintaining the holistic environment that we live in. It's where we live, and we're here for the long term, and that's our river. It's actually a river that flows beneath sand for most of the time, the Boyne River. But at that time, it actually had water in it. And that's unusual for us, but fantastic as well. So we make the most of it, and we really relish living in tune with that climate. The thing is about our country is that it's really good to us. It's a fantastic business to run. I'm really proud of the fact that we can actually be producing food for Australians and food to export. It's actually something that you think, what contribution am I making? What's my life accounting to? Well, every day there's actually something we're doing. And although there's lots of other things I do, in terms of, my husband does most of the farm work, I do a lot of work making sure that the rest of Australia understands what the beef industry is about. I want to look after other people in the industry as well. But when I come home, what always amazes me is, this is our house, but I don't need to walk into our house to feel at home. And it continues to fascinate me that I really only need to turn the last corner. And this is a tree near the track. When I turn the last corner to get home, and I can just feel the difference in the air, and I just know that country, it's part of me. I've absolutely wept with this country in droughts. I've had too many years of them. But I've also cried in awe at the scenes that it's given me, the moonrises and the sunrises and the sunsets. And it just wraps its arms around us. As a family, we run a business. We put an enormous amount of work and technology into what we do. But that country actually looks after us as well because we care for it. And I like to think of it that we live with the land. We're there and we're part of it, and it's part of us. My hope is that you'll share the story of where beef comes from in Australia. That you remember that when people think about factories, it's not all negative. It's not just about cars and aeroplanes. There are these amazing organic factories out there. They're factories that are turning raw ingredients that are really variable into an amazing, consistent product. When you gather your family around, you're creating memories around a fabulous meal. You have that beef in front of you. Think about the years of planning that have gone into it, the years of growing that beef, the years of planning our business, making sure it's financially sustainable, making sure our family is resilient and can withstand 10 years of drought and still be sane sometimes. A bit of champagne, Sally. But think about, share this story with your families, share this story with your friends for me. Share this story that the steak on your plate doesn't happen by chance. It's an enormous, amazing factory. So coming back, we're absolutely committed to using the climate to manage what we do. The topsoil is critical. It underpins my business. Energy is what we do. We turn energy into a protein source so you can have fantastic steaks. We're sustainable. We will be here. We've got 3 generations in the business at the moment, and one of them is injected at birth, and he will come back. I'm the 5th generation to grow beef in Australia in my family. What I also know is that if you keep eating red meat, you'll actually have the energy to be part of the solution for food security in Australia as well. Thank you.